get around to it. Those parents do.
Well, you know, I've
So,
given up hope at this point.
oh, don't give up hope.
There's always hope.
Here, there's so we have some people watching us now, and this is Benjamin Boyce, and my guest is Karlyn Borysenko.
Indeed. Well done. Well
And,
played.
and all I know about her is that she's pretty rad, and she's been running this YouTube channel for not that long of a time, but you're also an organizational psychologist.
Yes. Yeah. So my backstory is I'm an organizational psychologist, which means that I work with organizations all over the world to help create better working environments. My kind of area of specialty is combining organizational psychology and positive psychology, and also throwing in mindfulness techniques to help people reduce their stress, build more highly resilient working groups, things like that. And so that's what I do. But yeah, I also have a YouTube channel that I started just to talk about workplace stuff, and then about a month into it, an article that I wrote about going to a Trump rally as a Democrat went viral on the internet, and then my channel kind of accidentally exploded into like the politics realm, and I talk a lot about social justice stuff and how I think it's impacting the world and things like that. So
Do you ever give implicit mindfulness trainings to people?
implicit mind, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't not necessarily implicit. I think where I've really kind of found my sweet spot, and I actually wrote a whole book about this, is taking different mindfulness principles and making them practical in the work environment. So a lot of times people don't know how to translate mindfulness into the workspace in a way that feels appropriate, and so that's kind of where I sit. Not so much about meditation, but other things.
Okay. Yeah. Before we translate mindfulness, could you define mindfulness? Is there like a
Yeah.
red
So
blue
I
pill that we can swallow on this?
So when I'm looking at mindfulness, I think about three core principles. The first is being aware of what's going on in your mind, the internal dialogue that you're having, how you're perceiving different certain situations, how you're perceiving different coworkers.
Yeah.
Also being aware of any signals that you're getting from the body about if you might be under stress, if you might be getting angry, that sort of thing. Just noticing, not judging them at all.
Mm.
So being aware, number one. Then second is existing in the present moment. So oftentimes in work, and frankly in life in general, everything I talk about can be applied to both work and life. People let what has happened in the past get in the way of what's going on right now. So they think, oh, this bad thing happened to me 3 years ago. Maybe in a former job they had an idea for this great strategy, and then it failed colossally, and they think, oh, it failed that one time 3 years ago, so it's always going to fail. Well, guess what? 3 years later, that strategy may have found its time. It may be the audience may be ready for it. So you don't want to let the past get in the way of what you're working on in the present. In the same token, you don't want to let any fear of what might happen in the future get in the way of what you're working on right now. So how that manifests is people who say, I'm not even going to try because my boss will never approve the budget for this. And so they psych themselves out. Or a lot of times, actually, what I see most often is people say, my boss hates me, I'm going to get fired. So there's no point in even trying. And
Hmm.
then in having that philosophy, they end up getting themselves fired because it impacts how they're interacting with their boss.
Okay.
So being in that present moment, focusing on what's going on in front of you right now, not worrying about the past, not worrying about the future. The last part is trying to take a non-judgmental approach as much as possible, and essentially that, we make upwards of 35,000 judgments or choices every single day. So we're always making judgments about different things, and most of the time we're doing it without thinking about it. Well, what if we just slowed down and kind of just looked at what's in front of us and say, this isn't good, this isn't bad, it just is. And when you give yourself that space, when you give yourself that pause, you're able to take whatever's in front of you, even if it seems like it might be kind of a bad thing, and use it to your best advantage. You open yourself up to more opportunities. So those are kind of my three
Some
principles.
principles. So I might be going out on a limb or getting too quick to the punch here, but it seems like those stand in direct contradiction to this anti-bias training and this, like
Ah,
Robin DiAngelo's white fragility that projects a judgment onto everybody about a status of being racialized or racist or oppressed. And have you thought about that? Maybe you could give some, like, when did this stuff come on your radar, and then how did you start to wrangle with it?
Yeah. So when this stuff first came on my radar, honestly, the first inklings I got from it were a couple years ago when I tend to work with younger organizations just because it just tends to work out that way. And so a couple years ago, I started hearing about microaggressions all the time.
Yeah.
Everything was a microaggression. Everyone was running to HR complaining about these microaggressions. They were stupid things like someone forgot to CC you on an email, and so you're being microaggressed against, or someone forgot to invite you to a meeting. Things that literally happen to anyone in a professional work environment, right? And then there was all sorts of interpersonal challenges that were created because of these microaggressions. So that was when I first started to perk up and say, what is going on here? But honestly, it wasn't really, it wasn't as big a deal with most of my clients at that time. And what actually got my attention with the social justice stuff was in the knitting community. Because I'm a knitter. I knit avidly. I knit every single day. And one of the places that knitters tend to congregate is on Instagram, because we can show off our work and our yarns and all this stuff. And so what started to happen about a year and a half ago in the knitting world was these roving gangs of social justice warriors going around attacking and bullying and mobbing people and trying to destroy people's businesses. And it was awful. And I didn't understand what was happening. And so then I kind of started to pay attention to it. And then the minute that I started paying attention to it, I started seeing more of it show up in the work environment. So it's kind of one of those things that I think a lot of people, they interact with what's going on, and they don't really understand it. It's kind of like, that's kind of odd, or I don't understand that person's approach, but they don't necessarily see the big picture of what's happening until you see it, and then you cannot unsee it ever, and you start seeing it everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And let me go back a little bit so we know where we're kind of going to compare and contrast different sorts of, I guess, HR strategies towards working together in a workplace. How does mindfulness scale? It seems like it's very individual based. And how do you get that to foster in corporate community or culture?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great observation. It is very individual based, and it is all, I've always approached it as helping people to become more personally empowered in their work experience and in their career, because one of the things I do an awful lot of is manager training managers how to be good managers, see their employees as human beings, not treat them as though they're some kind of cog in a machine, and adapting your management style to each of your employees. And that goes along with work style stuff, which we might actually get into, because a lot of the things that Robin DiAngelo says are white supremacy in organizations actually just comes back down to conflict and work style, and we'll talk about that. But so one of the things that I hear from managers all the time is they say, Karlyn, how can I just get my team members to do what I want them to do without asking them? That is the number one question that I'm asked. And so when I approached mindfulness training at work, it was all about helping people to personally empower themselves so that we could appease the managers who just wanted these people to go out and do things and not be asking permission all the time. So you're right, it is a very individual thing, but I found that when we do mindfulness training in small groups in organizations, I'm talking like 20 people or less, we can really start to make, and this works especially well in like small to mid-sized organizations, we can really start to make a lot of difference in terms of how much control people feel like they have over their job. I mean, people all the time, more than you would think, are constantly waiting for their boss to give them permission to do things. And there's kind of like an unwritten expectation there that if you're my boss, you're gonna tell me exactly what to do at every single moment. Well, bosses don't want to operate like that. Bosses just want to kind of kick back in their chair and focus on their own work and trust that their people are going to do the things they want them to do. So there's a disconnect there between what the employee expects and what the boss wants. And when we can get the employees to take more control and personal responsibility over what they're contributing to their work experience, that tends to make the bosses happy as well. Mm-hmm. That makes sense?
Yeah. And so how do you, I guess, measure competency, You don't worry about that then. You worry about empowerment. So what is like could you define empowerment just a little bit more? Because that is a word that's used in this alternative training.
Yeah. Well, competency is not something I tend to worry about. And I think this is actually a really important point because especially when you're working with younger professionals, they're not competent. They're not learning how to do their actual job in college. They're coming in and young professionals, and I define young professionals as really anyone 30 and under. It's kind of an apprentice state for where you're at in your career. Even when you start to get promoted and move up the ranks, no one has ever taught you how to do these things before. And so most people are really figuring it out on the job. And so what I mean by empowerment is essentially you're not waiting for someone else to give you permission to do things. You feel as though you can tell yourself, you can give yourself permission to go take that meeting or go start that project or go work on that strategy or create that plan. You're not waiting for the boss to come say, go do this X, Y, B, and Z.
And what are some of the snags in that if everybody's an independent operator, and how do you navigate the disharmony that might arise from too many strong self-willed cats roaming about?
Well, the funny thing is, so this gets into a conversation about work style, because every single person comes into the office with different preferences and tendencies for how they're going to communicate with their coworkers, how they're going to operate in a work environment. And so one of those, and there are basically four main types of work styles that I look at. I use the DISC model for work style simply because it's the easiest for people who might not be familiar with this. It's a little bit like the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, or Jordan Peterson uses the Big Five, which I know about this much about. But there's some alignment with this. DISC is the one I found is the most easy. DISC has four main work styles. The first one starts with the D. That's for dominant. Ds are like, if you think of a D, think of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is, for lack of a better term, the biggest D on the planet.
I think most people will agree with you on either side of that aisle.
Well, and that's good and bad, right? Because, Ds, they bring a big, strong leadership presence to the workplace. They are the big picture people. They are the people that, if you were to take the phrase ready, aim, fire and put it in the mouth of a D, it's going to be ready, fire, aim, because they want to move first, and they're the bull in the china shop. And we need those people. We need those people to give us the big inspirational ideas. They usually have a lot of charisma, that sort of thing. The next work style is the I work style. This is the influencer work style. And this is all about people. They're the people. They're the natural salespeople. They're the people that can walk into a networking event and they'll know anyone within 20 minutes and be able to strike up a conversation. And they're just really fun. And they're the social creatures of the office. They're always like bopping around to different places. They tend to wear the bright colors, have the candy on the desk, that sort of thing. Yeah. And those are our more kind of like expressive,
extroverted.
The Disney, extroverted, okay. Like out there. They're not big personalities. So that's about 50% of your workforce right there. Every single style is about 25% of the workforce, give or take. Then you get into the more kind of like introverted, thoughtful, methodical work styles, which we start off with the S's. The S's are the supporter style, or I actually call them the service style most of the time. These are like the office moms. This is the style that takes care of other people. They actually gain internal satisfaction and motivation by helping to support the team. They tend to be very quiet. They also tend to be the people that you might say they put up a lot of red tape. So they're the people that are like afraid of change because they're always asking questions like, is this thing going to break that thing? And usually they're just doing it because they don't want problems to be created, right? So they're kind of like the mild-mannered style. And then you have your C's, which are your conscientious style, which is all about like if Dr. Spock took the disc, they'd be a C, right? Spock would be a C for sure, because it's all about data and process and logic and ration, and they do not like emotions at all in the workplace. So that's kind of our broad overview of the four styles. But I bring that up to say is that in most workplaces, and it's not an exact science, every workplace is different, but in most places, you are going to have about 25% of each style. That's just how it works out. That's how the assessment is normed. And so when we're talking about people personally empowering themselves, every single work style brings some something and balances out the other work styles in the organization. So if you can help people understand what they're bringing to the organization, and this is part of where awareness comes in, what they're bringing in terms of their work style, and then understand the other work styles that they're interacting with, that instantly gives them a lot of strategies for how they can interact with each other in a kind way, in an empathetic way, where they're not stepping on each other's toes, where they are working together, where they are collaborating. And so that's kind of how you can overcome the stepping on toes, is first, knowing that not everyone's going to be that big forceful D like Donald Trump. Some people are going to take a more lax approach, and it usually all balances each other out.
Who would you say, or what would you say Obama would be, just so we have like a compare and contrast?
So I actually think that Obama would be a D as well. But the thing of it is that most people are actually like a combination of two styles. Like I'm a D and an I combination. And so I think Obama also had some I in him, because it's also just like very charismatic and always out there. But I think most politicians honestly have a lot of the D style in them.
In your experience of that roving band of, where were the ladies that roamed the countryside in ancient Greece and decapitated men, the Dionysiites or the Bacchanals?
Yes, I think so.
So you've had some interaction with that it sounds like on an internet or a disembodied level, but what is your feeling about the dynamics of that correctness culture that turns into cancel culture, and how it's operating and how it's just kind of takes over organizations?
Well, the ironic thing is, and I was thinking about this a couple of weeks ago, is what I see in those roving gangs of social justice warriors is that there is always someone at the helm of that roving gang, right? And usually that person tends to be exactly like Donald Trump. They tend to have that same high D style. It's my way or the highway. My way is the correct way. And they usually tend to be very charismatic, so that they gain a lot of followers that might have some of the more passive styles in them, where they're like, oh, this person is saying this, and they seem pretty confident that that person over there is a white supremacist because they haven't bent the knee to the white fragility training.
Yeah.
So there usually does tend to be kind of like that leader, and then there tends to be like a lot of followers who don't have as strong of a personality, at least that I've seen.
Is there something about, what is your conception of what they're trying to do and why they act the way that they do? Just within, I guess we can use the knitting community. Like what do you think that was about, or what was it founded on? Power.
It's all about power. That's what the high Ds care about, is they care about power and they care about control. Now, they can care about it for different reasons. A lot of them care about control and power because they're deathly afraid of failure, is what it is. And they are afraid that if I am not the one at the top of the helm, if I am not the one that is calling the shots, then I am not going to achieve what I want to achieve. So I do think, and there are people that disagree with me on this, I do think that most of the people that get caught up in the social justice stuff, I think they come from a good place. I think that they genuinely believe that what they are doing is going to create a better world, a more fair world, a more just world, and they're taking control because it's their job to eradicate racism and all this stuff. I also believe there are a smaller minority that do not come from a positive place. I believe that those people tend to exhibit a lot of characteristics of narcissistic personality disorder, to be honest. But I think most people are coming from a just place. And so this idea that, if they aren't in control, if they aren't the ones calling the shots, then we are going to have a fundamentally racist world that is out of line with what they feel is acceptable.
Well, within the context of an organization, how do you restrain or contact or connect with that overly dominant, failure-adverse personality to tone them down a little bit? Is there ways to wrangle that? Especially if they're so dominant, how do you dominate the dominant?
Well, that's exactly actually what you have to do. That's exactly what you do when you have, and I used to give this advice to young professionals all the time when they had like a high D boss, is I would say you have to take them out of control. You have to come in and be even more D than they are, because life is about balance. So I'm gonna get a little risque for a moment, because it's just like the best example that I can possibly give of this. I know, you're welcome. So life is about balance. people cannot, if we have someone, say your average executive, and that executive goes in and they are the president of the company and they're calling the shots and they have to be the big swinging D in the room, so to speak. People cannot live their whole lives like that. So when that big, powerful person goes home at night, guess what tends to happen? They tend to be more submissive. So if we're thinking about,
it's like Macbeth then, kind of thing.
It is. So like, I always hesitate to give this example, but I'm just going to do it. So like in like the kink world, and I find this a lot with executives because I'm an executive coach, I hear all their dirty secrets. So all these powerful executives that I coach, when they go home at night in the bedroom, the wife is holding the whip. Okay, literally, because if you are in control all day, you need some time to yourself to be taken out of control. That feels good. That provides balance. So when you want to overwhelm these high D personalities in the workplace, you have to come in and out D them. You have to come in and be like, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it. And literally even hit your hand like that because that's what they like. And you take them out of control because what they're looking for is comfort. They're looking for someone to come in and say, I've got this. You don't have to worry about it. I've got control of this. I'm going to make sure that we win, that we get across the finish line. I think it's the same thing with SJWs in organizations or out of them, but let's focus on that in organization for a second. What's happening is that these people are in organizations, they're coordinating amongst themselves, they're having these conversations, they're creating these plans to do all this anti-racist stuff. No one is telling them no. No one is telling them there are better ways to achieve this. No one is coming in, except for Robin DiAngelo and her band of merry men, to say there are solutions to this problem. So because they're so afraid of what would happen if they were out of control, no one's presented them an alternative. So the only thing they have is I have to come in and take control of the scenario. Otherwise, we are going to fix things, to fix all the racism.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I might be, again, getting a little too far out there, but when it's the entire culture that is dominated by these Ds, it makes for very rowdy Cs. And I guess, is it just constant escalation? Is that what you see until we reach some sort of floor of physical confrontation?
No, because listen, if someone comes in and takes them out of control, what tends to happen is they calm down. Because they feel more safe. I mean, it sounds really counterintuitive, but that's actually a safe space for them. If they can look to someone and say, oh my gosh, I don't need to be in control because the boss has got it or the HR director's got it or whoever they trust to have control in that situation, it tends to calm them down. So if someone is coming in and saying, we've got a strategy for this, we're going to take care of it, we're going to do whatever it is, and implements correct training, not this anti-bias stuff, they start to feel more comfortable. So you don't see escalations. You more so see maybe they've escalated to this extent. The boss comes in, knocks them down a peg, and then they're like, okay, I don't need to do this anymore. Because it's exhausting. It is exhausting for people to be in the power position all the time.
Within the knitting quilting community, has it reached its peak? Does it not? Because I keep on seeing stories every once in a while, but another takedown, another takedown, another takedown, another takedown.
I thought it did, to be honest. It was actually quiet for a while in the knitting community, and then it was a couple of weeks ago. I want to say it was right around the time that all the Black Lives Matter protests were starting to pick up, and it went from 0 to 110 in a day. And all of a sudden, they started going after every major person in the knitting community again. But it seems to have dropped pretty quickly now. But, there was one guy that his store and his house are in Minneapolis, blocks away from where the riots were. And he had made a statement. And he did a live stream from his store just talking about knitting, and I think he was trying to manage his own stress level is my perception of it. And they were like, how dare you talk about knitting without making a statement? And they went after him and completely just destroyed him and mobbed him for days, and there were several apologies issued and all this stuff. So I thought it had peaked, and then Apparently it is not.
What's your intuition about why that escalation happened over the last month? I guess June was a very disastrous month for us emotionally.
I think that, well, at least in the knitting world, they hadn't really gone after anyone in a while. And I think this is actually true more generally, because
they were
here's
hungry.
the thing, when they were hungry. It's like they were hibernating, right? It's like we had the pandemic, we had an actual problem, and what was so interesting to me was the SJWs were all laying low during the pandemic. It was kind of like they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to insert their agenda into things. And so they just weren't doing anything. And I think many of us thought, we were like, has it finally died?
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
There are like real problems in the world now. And so we don't have to deal with the make-believe ones. But the minute that the thing happened with George Floyd, and I want to be very clear, I said this on my channel about 1,000,000 times, but I think I should say it here. What happened to George Floyd was a tragedy. It was a murder. It should not have happened. And I think we all agreed on that. We all agree that should absolutely not have happened. But that was their moment. And they seized it, and they came back with a vengeance. And it was almost like I'm convinced that this is an addiction for them. And this is not about fairness or justice. This is about, we need to feed this emotional addiction that we have. And it is an addiction to emotion. I mean, people can get anything that happens. This is why I love mindfulness so much. Anything that happens in our head will manifest itself in our bodies. Right. And so when we learn to be in control of our emotions, we can actually feel physically better. So but what's happening with the SJWs is they are so addicted to outrage. They are so addicted to anger that there is actually a physical body addiction to those emotions. And people don't understand what I mean when I say we are physically addicted to emotions. So I'm gonna preempt the question. I'm going to explain it. Think about a time when you've had a nightmare. Say you have just woken up from a nightmare, and you had a nightmare where you were being chased through the woods by an axe murderer, and you woke up. And what are you physically feeling if you've woken up from that nightmare, Benjamin?
High arousal, I guess.
I suppose high arousal. Your heart's probably racing.
Yeah. Right?
You're probably sweating. Your whole body might be tense. Maybe you feel like you just ran a 5K through the woods. Did you just run a 5K?
In my mind.
In your mind?
Yeah.
But what happened in your mind physically manifested in your body.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
When we have strong emotions, and they could be positive emotions, could be negative emotions. When we have strong emotions in our head, what happens is our brain tries to help us out, and our brain produces all sorts of wonderful hormones that it just sinks into our body, because it's saying, I'm going to help you physically feel the emotions that you're having in your head. But the brain doesn't make judgments. It doesn't say, Karlyn, do you really want to feel angry? No, I think you want to feel calm. I'm going to give you calm hormones. No, brain doesn't do that. Brain says, if you feel angry, I'm going to give you angry hormones. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens? I see this happen in the workplace all the time. So what happens if you have an average employee that hates their boss causes them all sorts of stress. Every time they see their boss, they get a little bit angry. And so this person sees their boss every day. Every day, their brain gives them these nice little anger hormones that makes their body feel angry, right? What happens when the boss goes on vacation? And all of a sudden, they stop getting that hit of those hormones every single day. And for the first couple days, they're like, this is great. This is like, I'm on vacation too. I don't have to see the boss. I'm not getting angry, all this stuff. What happens by about day 3 or 4 is they start actively going through withdrawal from the emotions. So they go through a physical withdrawal because they're not getting that hit from hormones from their brain, right? So the body's like, brain, we had a good thing going here. Like, you got angry, I got those hormones, like what happened? And so when that happens, they start creating problems. They start creating problems where there were no problems before. So they start getting annoyed about silly things. They're like, you didn't put a smiley face in that email. What the hell? And they start these interpersonal conflicts over nothing.
And when you have the idea of microaggressions coming in, then you have just a carte blanche.
Oh, yeah, anything can be a microaggression. That's what's so great about microaggressions is literally any single thing can be a microaggression and let's just ignore for a moment that no single microaggression affects two people the same way. That doesn't matter. So yeah, I mean they start to look for things to be upset about. And this is exactly what's going on with the SJW stuff is it will never ever be enough because they are addicted to the emotions of anger and outrage.
I noticed that about myself. I think it was in 2015. I noticed that I was going onto a specific subreddit because they had this type of outrage porn that I was really into. It loosely tied to Gamergate, and I was just like looking at all these crazy SJWs like ruining the gaming community, and I'm like, whoa. You're looking for that now. You're looking for that hit now, and you see that on Twitter too. If 2 days if 2 days go by without a cancellation, they'll find somebody to cancel.
Oh, and that happened to me with the knitting stuff too, and I think it's actually happened with a lot of the knitters. Is we're actively looking to engage in these because the thing about the knitters is we fought back. Right. Okay. A lot of us fought back against the crazy SJW. So now I feel like we're all on guard, kind of like looking for this stuff. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is it's that quote about not becoming the monsters that you're fighting.
Yeah.
Because I really am afraid of that. Because sometimes I feel like I go from 0 to 60 in terms of anger so quickly with these people. I'm like, nope, not today.
Okay, yeah.
SJW.
So what were some of the tactics that the Jedi knitters used against the Sith knitters that were effective?
So I think the biggest thing was just speaking up at first, to be honest, which was not altogether an easy thing because we're talking about literally, I mean, one of the instances in the knitting wars was one person, the worst mobbing that happened was this one person wrote a poem about kindness and posted it to Instagram. And that was not considered to be acceptable. That was considered to be tone policing. And he got mobbed by hundreds, if not thousands of people for days and days and days. And it sounds silly, but he actually ended up going to the hospital on suicide watch because they destroyed his business.
No, I'm not. I'm laughing in commiseration. It's really intense.
It was awful, and thank God he's okay now. But it was really difficult to speak up, and I wasn't the first to speak up by any means, but I think I was one of the earlier ones. And how I did it was I just posted the definition of the word bullying on my Instagram and just tagged their little hashtags in it. And I did my dissertation about workplace bullying. So I understand what bullying looks like. And so it was just little things like that. I was posting the definition of bullying. We had another person, Nancy Round Rabbit on Instagram. She started just posting these one-word posts that talked about the different phenomena we were seeing to try to teach people what was going on. At the same time, we were very lucky that Unsafe Space, which is a show that both you and I have been on YouTube, they started talking about the knitting wars and they started explaining what was going on, and that was actually really helpful. And a lot of us call it our favorite knitting podcast now because they still are the people talking about this the most. But it helped explain to us what was going on and why we were seeing it. And I think once we understood what was going on, that made it a lot easier to fight back.
So we spoke very briefly, or we just kind of pitched in. I threw an idea out there and you said, yeah, let's do that. But organization after organization are being infiltrated not only with training, but entire departments who are devoted to policing discourse and behavior, called diversity, equity, inclusion, or just like this kind of metastasized HR department. So there's a couple of different layers of problems, but what are some of the ideas that you have for somebody in a medium to small company who's watching this training kind of roll in, and how do you perceive that they should stand against it or question it or go along the route of trying to get it minimized before it becomes part of the corporate culture?
Well, I think one of the first things, and James Lindsay has written a lot about this on Twitter lately, and he's actually got a much better handle on how to fight back against it than I do in the organizational context, to be frank. But I think the very first thing that people need to understand is that most executives don't care about this. They can be releasing all the statements in the world. I don't care. Most of them do not care. They're simply doing it because they know that if they do not do it, the mob is going to come after them. That is all it is. And so maybe there's a handful of them that are actually bought into this ideology, but most of them flat not. Even if they have a diversity and inclusion office or a person in charge of that, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bought into this ideology. And I think people need to have that context going into it, because so many people are afraid to speak up against it and to say, this is not the thing that is required. Now, when they do have these diversity professionals, oftentimes they're going to default to them because, again, people need to have an idea of how executives make decisions, right? Executives just want to focus on the high level. They want to focus on the things that are actually driving profitability for the organization. HR, diversity and inclusion, that is a cost center for the organization. It is not producing profit. It is only costing the organization money. But it's one of those things, again, so the executives is almost always going to say, you guys just do what you want to do. Just don't bother me with it. Don't take up too much of my time. So it's really the diversity and inclusion offices and the HR offices that are running the show in this. How I think that people can push back is really to question the value of these types of trainings to executives, to the people that are actually paying the money for the Robin DiAngelos to come in. Because I haven't seen, and I'm curious if you've seen any data about this too, but I have actively been looking for data that proves the effectiveness of this training. I haven't found it. Have you seen anything?
One thing that I found, and it was a while ago, said that it's actually more cost effective to focus on communications rather than implicit bias, just like on how to communicate with human beings as human beings.
Yeah, and that's what I believe too, and that's why I put all the emphasis on the work style training, because when you look at these, I have this like 6-page document that the city of Seattle is using for their diversity training, and when you look at every single bullet point on that list of what makes a white supremacist organization, every single one of them goes back to conflicts in work style. And guess which work style they have the most problem with?
Trump's work style.
Trump's work style.
But which is ironically the people who get the most power in these environments.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But that's what they characterize as a white supremacist organization, is that overtly dominant style. When they, if everyone just stepped back and understood more about themselves, what they're bringing to the environment, how they can interact well with their coworkers, that would alleviate almost every single problem that they have. Almost every single one.
And to bring it back to the individual, have you been in because not only are organizations suffering strain from white fragility, etc., but a lot of family members, personal relationships, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, friends groups are now being thrust into this. You need to be an anti-racist because it's no longer off the table for you to just not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. There's a very zealot, evangelical kind of thrust to this doctrine. So how do you confront somebody, or, how do you deal with somebody who's exhibiting very zealot-like behavior and forcing you to believe in something? How do you kind of talk them down from that pitch?
Well, I think the phrase you use there that's interesting is someone is forcing you to believe something. No one can ever force you to believe anything. Right? You have to make the choice. Do I buy into this or do I not buy into this? And if you fundamentally don't buy into it, I think that it's a matter of, one of the issues that I have with what's going on right now is that people are so afraid to speak up against it. People on all sides. I mean, I get emails all the time from people who, even if they hate Trump, they hate everything he's doing, they're like, I'm not on board with what's going on, but I'm afraid if I say it, I'm going to lose my job. So let's just, stepping back, in any organization, probably about 50% of the people there are not supporting this. And we know that because probably about 50% of the people, frankly, voted for Trump. Right. And so they're not on board with this, but they're terrified to speak up. I think that is actually the best thing that we can all contribute to this situation right now, is if we are not comfortable with what's going on, it doesn't matter how adamant the person is standing in front of you. The person, You are responsible for what you are contributing to the situation. You are not responsible for anyone else's response to what you are contributing. And so many people are worried about the response that they're forgetting to focus on what they are giving to it. So I think speaking up and not worrying about, let them have their hissy fit, let them wear themselves out. It's like a child on the floor screaming and beating the floor. Let them cry and wear themselves out, but you don't have to give into it.
But in an employment situation, you're responsible for your livelihood, your rent, and your children, whatever your job is helping you support. So if you're putting that on the line, it's not just, you have to be responsible for the response that you're going to get for speaking up and standing up.
And you could lose your job.
Yeah.
But you have to ask yourself, I mean, first off, getting fired is not as scary as a lot of people think it is. It's really not. You are going to be able to get another job. I promise you, you're going to be able to get another job. But most of the time, it's not going to come to that. And what I've thought about quite a bit is, what if everyone in any organization that doesn't support this just spoke up and said no? Are they going to fire half the organization? No, they're not. They can't. That would be shooting themselves in the foot. And so that's why speaking up is so important. Don't be afraid of losing the job. If you are going to get fired for standing your ground around something that has nothing to do with the work that you were hired to do, then do you really want to work there anyway? Honestly, there are a lot of organizations that are just fine that you can go work for one of them. And I know it's a little bit tricky given the economy is kind of bouncing back right now, and I get that. But they can't fire everyone who speaks up if everyone stood together and had their voices heard. They can't do it.
Is there a way to, there's a number of different ways to tackle this ideology or this philosophy and this set of behaviors that we call all these different names. And the problem with the names is that it seems like we're ragging on SJWs when we're actually talking about a very specific phenomenon that's repeating itself over and over and over again through all these different layers of life. Is there ways of arguing against that could be used, or is mindfulness a way of arguing against a philosophy by showing its strengths and weaknesses, by showing the effect that it's actually having on somebody? And is that it might be kind of ethically squishy area here, but is that a way to gauge the reality of a belief system?
You know, I mean, the spiritual part of me that says that reality is what you make of it, which I know is not something people want to hear when it comes to, particularly in relation to the SJW stuff. But, truths are true to those who believe them. And I think that if you can get yourself to a mental place using mindfulness, using meditation, using whatever tools you want to use to feel powerful, to feel in control, to feel comfortable expressing your point of view. I mean, the thing of it is, and I don't have empirical evidence to show this, I absolutely do not, but my lived experience, for lack of a better term, is that if you are showing up fully and with confidence, then most of the time the organization, and especially HR offices and especially diversity and inclusion offices, they're going to back down. Most of the time listen, here's what people need to understand. HR offices and organizations do not have as much power as people think they do. Same with diversity and inclusion offices, because again, if you're looking at the executive is up here, and then you have HR, diversity, inclusion, sometimes they're combined. They are more of a nuisance to most executives than they are a benefit. The only reason that HR and diversity and inclusion has power is because they convince the staff that they are implementing the will of the executive, but most of the time they are not. And if the executive gets wind that people, especially people that are producing for the organization, that are hitting bottom line goals, that maybe they've caught the eye of the executive in some way or another. If the executive finds out that HR is going after their favorite employees that are actually creating profit for the organization, they're going to tell HR to cut it out. HR can't fire anyone unless someone signs off on it. That's just the way it is in most organizations. Not all, but in most that's the case. And people, go ahead.
Is HR necessary? for organizations?
Yeah. Yes, but most organizations use it very ineffectively. I would say I think HR can be incredibly valuable for organizations. There are a lot of things about the employee experience that needs to be managed. Everything from onboarding to benefits to perks to recognition to all the different tools you can use for all these things. These things need to be managed somewhere. I actually think that it's a mistake when organizations outsource their HR, and a lot of organizations do that, or when they use HR just as like a CYA thing to make sure they don't get in legal trouble and sued. But there's a lot of benefits that can be had when HR people are actually focused on the employee experience and setting in place systems and processes to support that, rather than doing these little witch hunt things.
Yeah, that's the question. So how do you perceive HR got infected by this kind of policing, inquisition kind of stuff? It seems like drastic overreach of what they were supposed to do, but now it's kind of just across the board. Could you help me understand that?
It started a couple years ago with, what's funny is the main HR organization in the world, the Society for Human Resources Management. I've spoken at their conference the last several years. I was supposed to speak at it actually this week and they canceled it.
Why would they cancel it?
I don't know. I was supposed to go to San Diego, man. I was I was ready to go. But they did cancel it. And so the organization, SHRM, has actually gotten in trouble with the HR community because Johnny Taylor, who's the president of SHRM, has worked very closely with the Trump administration. And SHRM has not bought into this stuff. They really haven't. They've been working alongside the Trump administration on all sorts of things. And there have actually been a lot of campaigns that the HR community has kind of been trying to bubble up to fix the main HR organization because they aren't buying into this stuff. So I think, and I think that's actually good news because not as many HR people are infected with this as people think.
Okay.
And this is important context. There are a portion of them that are, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it's really not as far reaching as everyone thinks. There are a lot of HR people that are like, I don't care about any of this stuff. I just want to go in and keep my head down and process applications or whatever they're doing all day. They really don't care. And that's good news. The bad news is that the people who have been infected with it have definitely gained power in the last couple months. It is now being taken far more seriously. And I think it started, well, see, here's the thing. There are legitimate trainings and strategies associated with diversity and inclusion that can benefit organizations, right? There are very legitimate things that can be done, and there are actually some really great diversity and inclusion training professionals out there that do not buy in to the white fragility, implicit bias stuff. There's all sorts of things you can talk about with diversity and inclusion. Those started to get infected though about a year ago. I think a lot of them read white fragility the first time it became popular and started infusing those strategies into organizations. But I would say it's only been the last year that I've really started to see that gain any traction, and only the last couple months where I've seen it kind of go through the roof now. But not everywhere.
What made SHRM resilient to this? What was the philosophy? Or
I don't know about the philosophy, but it has the ironic thing is Johnny Taylor, again, the president of SHRM, is black. And his chief of staff is black, and they just never bought into it. I think that I don't know their politics for sure, but Johnny Taylor's always seemed pretty pleased anytime he's been around Trump. So I tend to think that he's a conservative. And so I think that he just didn't fundamentally buy into it. And again, we talk about strong leadership, right?
Okay.
He didn't buy into it. The organization didn't buy into it.
Well, why do you think it came from the left then? Why do you think that Democrats or the Democratic Party was susceptible to it? What's the opposite of resilience to this social justice cancel culture?
Why did it come from the left? It came from the left because Trump got elected.
And it was a reaction.
I think so. I mean, I don't know for sure, and I'm sure there are people that have thought more on this topic than I have, but well, no, you know what? That's actually not true. I think that this has been brewing on the left for a while. It's funny. I'd actually been questioning about whether or not I kind of like, because about 6, 7 months ago, I kind of went down the YouTube rabbit hole, and that's when all my friends were convinced that I was like
Oh
radicalized
yeah.
by the alt-right. And I was actually starting to wonder that. I was like, were you radicalized by the YouTube? And I went back just the other day and I found a post on Facebook that I made from 20 to the effect of Hobby Lobby only offered certain types of birth control for their employees, and it ended up going to the Supreme. Their employees sued them. They wanted access to all different types of birth control. The people that run Hobby Lobby, it is a family-owned private business. They're deeply religious people, and they didn't want to offer certain forms of birth control that were taken after the baby was conceived as opposed to before. And so they got sued by their employees, and the Supreme Court decision came down that said that that Hobby Lobby, because it was a privately held, close, family-owned business, they were not they could, because of freedom of religion, they didn't have to offer these forms of birth control.
Yeah.
And so the left kind of went crazy, and they were screaming about how, this is, against women's reproductive rights and all this stuff. What they never talked about was the fact that Hobby Lobby was already offering birth control to its staff. It was in the insurance they had. They had like 14 different options of birth control that they could choose from. And so when this case happened, I was like, when I first got on birth control back in college, I had 3 options, and 3 options was enough. If someone can't pick from 14 different options, then they are like, it's just like not okay. Like they could be an adult, make a choice.
Yeah.
And so I tell that story only because I don't think that this started with Trump, but because it was happening way back then.
Yeah.
But it really escalated with Trump. And I think just the shock of Trump getting elected, they never quite got over it. And then this whole resist movement started right after Trump got elected, right? Now, one of the mindfulness things that I always teach is what resists persists. What that essentially means is that when you're fighting something, when you're fighting aggressively towards something, you tend not to defeat the thing. You just create bigger problems. It actually makes it a much bigger problem than it would have been otherwise. If the left had just relaxed and let Trump do his thing, and yeah, he's probably going to implement policies you don't like, whatever, but just like relax, let him do his thing, let him be president, pick a much better candidate than Joe Biden to run against him in 4 years, they probably could have gotten him out. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but they didn't do that. They resisted. Yeah. There were all these resist marches. I mean, the day after Trump got inaugurated, what happened? The Women's March, the Resistance March. And so they created a much bigger problem that I even wonder if they have control over this problem anymore. I don't know.
That's the question. I asked tongue-in-cheek if I'm more worried about Trump getting reelected or Biden getting elected, and worried specifically about the left because I don't trust it either way. I know that if Trump gets elected, they've only ever doubled down and gotten more and more irate in the process, if it's even possible. I mean, eventually grammar itself will just deteriorate under the brunt of their outrage. But if Biden gets in, like I said in our last stream, what if D'Angelo, well, she's already thankfully being canceled, but what are they going to implement with regards to all this training, with regards to all these, frankly, outrageous and illiberal ideas about racism or whatever other thing that they want to do? So I just to answer or to speak to, can they slow down? Can we get back to a moderate Democrat, moderate progressivism?
I don't know.
Are you worried?
Am I worried?
What's your outlook?
I'm very worried. I think that if I'm choosing, there was a minute that I was very hardcore. I'm voting for Trump. I don't care anymore. The left can go, do whatever. Like, I'm done.
When was that? And that was your moment, your viral moment?
So no, it was actually after the viral moment. So what happened with my moment is, so I live in New Hampshire, right? So I had actually seen every single Democratic presidential candidate. I voted for Pete Buttigieg in the New Hampshire primary. I was very into New Hampshire politics for the primary. And then the day before the New Hampshire primary, Trump was coming to town to have a rally, and I kind of thought, well, why not go? It's going to be a spectacle. If nothing else, it's going to be like a fun time. I've never been to a Trump rally before. So I went, and then I wrote about just my experience meeting Trump supporters and discovering, lo and behold, that they were not actually bad people, that there were no Nazis at the Trump rally. There were no Klan robes at the Trump rally. They were just like normal, average, everyday people that just had different ideas than me. And I don't know. I mean, I suppose this shouldn't have been a revelatory moment that Trump supporters are not evil, mean people, but it was, because I had been stuck in the liberal echo chamber of like MSNBC and social media and my friends. And so I wrote this article, and I didn't say anything profound in it other than we need to start mending the political divide, and I'm not going to hate people I don't know simply because they voted for someone different than me. I was really over that kind of angst. And so the article went viral, and I immediately got attacked from every which way from the left. And I won't say I wasn't expecting it, but it hits you hard when all you do is write an article saying these are not bad people, and all of a sudden people are going after your business, people are contacting your clients, people are sending you hate mail every single day. I lost so many friends in that, and just being treated really, really badly by everyone that I had known, even my own mother. I was on like Fox News a couple days after my article went viral, and I hadn't been able to get a hold of my mother up until like half an hour before I was on Fox News to tell her like turn on the channel or whatever. And I told her what was going on, and she was like, "Karlyn, that's great, but those are the enemy." And I was like, "Okay. Did you not read the article that I sent you 3 days ago?" or something like that. So it was essentially the blowback from the left, and then the pandemic happened, and I thought that the Democrats were being very obstructionist in terms of helping people and the relief package around that. And then and I always said, even back last fall before any of this, I always said, if the Democrats try to destroy the economy for the sake of winning an election, I will never forgive them. Because I was having the best year ever for my business before all of this blew up. And I was very annoyed, and I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm voting for Trump. You can all go jump off a bridge for all I care. I was very angry. And then I kind of waffled back, and I was like, I actually like some of the things Trump has done. I really do. But some of them I'm just like, man, Trump, like, get it together with the attitude and the tweeting. And like, I really think that Trump could have come out a lot stronger after, George Floyd's death. And he could have said, maybe like make Juneteenth a national holiday or something. Like, there's so many things he could have done to bring people together in that moment. And he didn't do it. And so then I was like, I don't know if I'm voting for you anymore. But here's the thing, is I actually think that this is a much bigger question now. I think that where I'm at right now is this is not a decision between Trump and Biden as much as it is a decision between, do you want an authoritarian control freak party to take over our country? Or do you want to give Trump the helm a little while longer, even though he's not your favorite person in the world? And so I actually think that this is, because one of the things I have to say about Trump is he hasn't been a fascist in this whole thing. He didn't knock down Chaz in Seattle with the army like he could have. He has kind of sat back and said, you mayors and governors, you do your thing. He has not been a fascist. And so fundamentally for me, this is a choice between authoritarianism and liberalism, for lack of a better word. And on that premise, I think I have to go with Trump, because Joe Biden, if he gets elected, is not going to be leading anything. He's not going to be in charge.
I don't think he's leading anything right now.
No.
Maybe he has some sort of input into what his Twitter says, but I doubt even that.
I doubt it. No, I saw a video of him the other day where people were asking if he has cognitive tests, and he was like, I'm tested all the time, just look at me. And he didn't even answer the question. I was like, do you even know who you're running against right now? Do you know what's happening? And it's just irresponsible. Like, the fact that the Democratic Party, of all of the candidates that they had, put up Joe Biden. I'm like, do you even want to win? Are you even trying?
Yeah, maybe he was a loss. It seems like, so these mobs come through and force corporations to make these statements. And now McDonald's is promoting Kendi, just the stupidest man in the world. If you remember my Evergreen documentary, there's this
Yes.
one guy named Felix Braffith who's really a horrible public speaker, but he has the mic a whole lot and he's doing a lot of like the preaching at the canoe meeting. But he's like kind of this weird, vacuous, just diversicrat. You know, he's just talking about revolution, but he has no charisma. And Kindy's the same way. But anyways, all these corporations are making all these overtures. All these businesses are presumably putting in these workshops and trainings. And for sure, academia has... It's bolted right into academia that the most powerful people on the campus are these diversity, equity, and inclusion officers and stuff, which is horrible, horrible, horrible situation to be. And I think it's a different situation than with corporations, because corporations actually have to have a bottom line. All the colleges have to do is just munch on student debt. In a way. But the mob has a very strong power of flexing and forcing these companies to flex. You also have, on the ground level, you have Antifa and its wild variants doing absolutely insane shit on the streets. So, but maybe that is just a distraction. Maybe the overreaction that I kind of dread from the left, from the authoritarian left, will kind of fizzle out. But I still feel like they're going to keep on doubling down and doubling down and doubling down. Maybe not to infinity, but do you think that it'll just, the Democrat or the left will learn its lesson that they can't go that far? They have to kind of gel. Do you think that that's a possibility?
I don't know, because I've thought a lot about this. I'm terrified of what happens if Trump gets reelected in November. And I do think Trump's going to get reelected in November. And I think that, you know, I spent a lot of time in the past day or so in there are all these groups on Facebook about exposing racists and like providing evidence about people's racism and creating these strategies of reaching out to their employers and all these things. And I've spent a lot of time in those groups in the past couple of days. And I think that they would be legitimately shocked if Trump got elected. I think that they would really not see it coming at all. They're convinced that Joe Biden is an absolute lock, that everyone's in favor of Biden, that no one's possibly going to vote for Trump. And I don't think that that's the case at all. And so I think it's going to be 2016 all over again, except they'd probably take it much harder this time than they did last time. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing in terms of, you know, we're seeing this on Twitter and the Twitter and Reddit and, you know, these mass cancellations of conservatives. I think they're terrified. And so you know, part of me says that it might just be easier if Biden got elected, just give them what they want. But I don't think that's actually going to fix the problem. At the end, I think it's just going to embolden them. And I think that's what we see on college campuses, right? Is they get a victory, they get emboldened, and then they're like, ooh, what more can I take? What more can I take? Like children, seeing how many times they can go back and take candy out of the jar, right?
I thought you were saying that they're feasting on children. Like, ooh, I can have all the children that I want.
No, well, maybe. I mean, I think if they thought it would help them meet their goal, who knows what they would do. So
what's your plan going ahead? What are you focusing on the next few weeks with regards to your media output? Or do you have like a conception of what you're up to as you move through this virtual space?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been focusing on quite a bit is, you know, I never thought I would put myself in a position of helping conservatives to win an election. Like life comes at you in mysterious ways. But one of the things I'm actually spending a lot of time doing is I have a community on Locals where I have been coaching people who are Trump supporters to express their beliefs. And, you know, I don't always agree with what they're saying, but I think that it's very important, if I'm coming from a place where I believe mindfulness and empowerment is important and you know, taking control of your experience is important, then expression is a gift that I think that we all have been given by virtue of just existing. We don't have to do anything to earn the ability to express ourselves, but it's kind of like a use it or lose it thing. And I think a lot of people who have supported Trump have been quiet. And if I want Trump to win in November, and I think that is important, I want to be helpful in terms of teaching people how to find their voice. Because one of the things I've heard from Trump supporters over and over again, and it's so funny because I never would have guessed this when I was still a Democrat, is that they don't speak up. They're the silent majority. They're going to show up and vote in November, and that's all they're going to do, because if they speak up, or if they wear their MAGA hats, or if they put a Trump sign in their front yard, someone's going to destroy their yard or key their car or all this stuff. They're so afraid. And, if I can help people to find their voice and to say what they think without fear, questions of it, that to me is time well spent. And, maybe Trump wins, maybe he doesn't. But helping people to find their power is something that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, it seems like we're under a soft form of the reign of terror in the way. Like there is a lot of social pressure not to disagree with this particular narrative. And I've been trying to do my own, contributions to that. And you're doing wonderful. You kind of came out running. It's just so amazing what you're doing.
I mean, well, I was a professional speaker I still am, I guess, technically a professional speaker. There are just no events that I can go and speak at. So I think I'm naturally pretty comfortable speaking up. And, I've been very lucky that I've had a lot of teachers that have taught me how to speak up and have given me that power, and have helped me to gain the confidence to do it. And, one of the things that I've always been really good at is coaching people. And so, I think it's important. I think that one of the things that I get great joy from is watching how people change when they realize that they can speak up and say what they want and no one can hurt them. If you come from an empowered place and you say what you think without caring what the repercussions are, people usually are not going to come back and do anything to you. And so that's really, I think, the most important thing to me right now. But I also think that, I think people like you, like me, anyone that's speaking up on these subjects, through virtue of us doing what we're doing, we're giving other people permission to do the same. And we're showing them how to do it. And we're showing them that there are all sorts of different ways to speak up, that you don't need to be aggressive about it. You don't need to be mean. I think one of the things that I really struggle with on YouTube, especially, is that so many people are so negative. And they're so pessimistic about what's going on. And so what I really try to do with my content is I try to show that, life is what you make of it. These situations are what you make of it. And you can always look at things in an optimistic way. And, we don't have to be doom and gloom. The Democrats are doom and gloom enough right now. We don't have to follow suit.
Well, where can people find you then?
Yeah, so people can find me on my channel, which I think you linked in the description here, so they can visit me over there. They can find me on Twitter at Dr. Karlyn B, and they can find me on Parler, which I actually think is like way better than Twitter right now, at just my first name, Karlyn.
Karlyn. And Locals too, which is
Locals.
That's kind of a. Could you explain that? Just to me.
Yeah. So Locals is kind of it's Dave Rubin's platform about just like kind of creating like these uncensored communities that people can join for their favorite content creators. So I'm on there. I'm at kb.locals.com. All sorts of people are on there. Zuby's on there. Dave Rubin's obviously on there. And it's basically like a little contained social network. So you can post whatever you want. You can have interesting discussions. One of the reasons I joined Locals was I trust Dave Rubin not to censor things, to be really honest. And it was actually it was funny because I have a discussion group on Facebook that's just dedicated to civil discussion from a variety of different perspectives. And almost immediately upon launching that group, Facebook started censoring us started just deleting stuff from the group. So I was like, well, this is not going to last
Sons
very
of bitches,
long.
Man. Just amazed.
It's crazy. And some of the stuff they're censoring, it's like, it's so innocuous. Like one of the things that just got immediately deleted from the group when someone posted it, and I got a notification as the admin, but it was just a list of questions like, why can I shop at the supermarket, but I can't shop at TJ Maxx? It was just a list of questions like that. And Facebook nuked it. Wow. So I'm doing that on Locals now to get away from the censorship.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I hope we can do this semi-regularly or whatever.
Me too, man. I think that you're one of the voices on YouTube that I really appreciate because you're just so kind of like even keeled, and I really appreciate the perspective and just like the sane conversation. Sanity is at a premium right
Yeah.
now.
Well, that and when I do go crazy, it really pops. It really pops when I get
It
angry.
does.
So just like,
I've really, you've been getting more persnickety lately, and I've really enjoyed it. Like you did something like I think it was like last night. I was like, "Ooh, Benjamin's having a moment."
well, they went after gender critical, and like I said, I don't totally agree with that community, but I want them a part of this conversation. It's just insane that they get nuked, and then all that
It's
porn's up too. It's just insane.
it's terrifying. It's terrible. I mean, free speech is one of those things that like I've cared about the most since I was a kid. And I learned when I was like 13, 14 years old that the way that you protect free exchange of ideas, freedom of speech, is that you have to defend the ideas that are most reprehensible. I learned that when I was a kid. Apparently people don't learn that anymore.
Yeah, no, we're gonna quick see the product of the squelching of speech. It's gonna cause even more problems than they're trying to fix.
I agree.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'll let you
Thank
get
you for
on to
having me.
your
The rest of my day.
yeah, whatever that's gonna be.
Yes. Thank you for having me, my friend.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Let's end this up. Finish. Bye, guys.